Elena Rothman had 48 hours before federal investigators would arrive at her office with warrants. She discovered the fraud at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, alone in her corner office on the 39th floor, watching numbers that should have been hers twist into evidence of crimes she never committed. The board already knew they were preparing to sacrifice her. In desperation, she dialed the only forensic accountant in New York, a black single dad who had never taken a favor from power. Malcolm Hayes answered on the third ring, his voice flat, unimpressed, belonging to a world that had never protected a black man like him. The townhouse in Bedford-Stuyvesant sat on a quiet block where oak trees had survived 3 generations of urban renewal, where black families had learned to hold their ground. Elena's driver circled twice before she ordered him to stop, certain there had been some mistake. The building was narrow, red brick darkened by decades, with window boxes that held the dry remains of summer herbs. No doorman, no security panel with facial recognition, just a wooden door with paint peeling near the hinges, and a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. She knocked and waited, acutely aware of how foreign she felt standing on the stoop in her $4,000 coat, her Italian leather briefcase clutched against her chest like armor against a world she did not understand. Malcolm Hayes, a tall, broad-shouldered black man, opened the door wearing a gray cardigan over a white undershirt, reading glasses pushed up into close-cropped coils that were beginning to gray at the temples. His deep brown skin caught the hallway light, his face composed, unreadable. He carried the kind of stillness that suggested immense energy held deliberately in check. He looked at her the way one might examine a document that had arrived without proper postage, with mild curiosity and no particular urgency. His dark eyes swept over her once, cataloging details, then returned to her face with an expression that offered nothing. "Miss Rothman, Mr. Hayes, thank you for seeing me at this hour." He stepped aside without responding, and she entered a home that smelled of lemon cleaner and old books. The living room was small but meticulously organized, every object placed with intention. A leather sofa that had been reupholstered at least once, the stitching careful but visible. Bookshelves covered an entire wall, arranged not by color or size, but by subject, with handwritten labels on each section: forensic accounting, federal tax code, criminal procedure, African American history. A child's drawing in a simple black frame above the fireplace depicted 2 brown-skinned figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun, stick limbs, and big smiles. Beside it sat a framed photo of a beautiful black family: Malcolm, a woman with warm brown skin and tight curls, and a toddler with a puff of coils, captured mid-laugh. Malcolm gestured toward a chair but did not offer her water, coffee, or any of the usual hospitality she had come to expect when entering someone's space. He simply sat across from her in a worn armchair and waited, his dark brown hands resting on his knees, his posture neither welcoming nor hostile. "You know why I am here," she said. "I know what the financial news reported this morning. I know your stock dropped 14% when it closed the bell. I know 3 board members have already spoken to federal prosecutors. Beyond that, I know only what you are willing to tell me." His voice carried no inflection, no curiosity, no judgment. It was the voice of a man who had learned to conserve his reactions the way others conserve money, spending them only when absolutely necessary. Elena opened her leather portfolio and removed a stack of documents, printouts she had made herself, and she no longer trusted anyone. "Someone has been moving money through shell accounts connected to our international agreement. The transactions are designed to look like tax fraud, but old, wearing pajamas printed with small yellow stars. Her warm brown skin glowed in the lamplight, and a cloud of tight curls had been gathered into a slightly crooked puff on top of her head. She had her father's eyes, dark and watchful, set in a face that carried traces of someone else, a mother perhaps, in the delicate bone structure and the full curve of her lips. She looked at Elena the way one examines an unfamiliar species that has wandered into familiar territory. "Ava." Malcolm's voice softened almost imperceptibly, a shift so subtle Elena might have imagined it. "Back to bed." "Is she in trouble?" the girl asked. "That is not your concern." She looked scared. Her hands are shaking. Malcolm stood and crossed to his daughter, placing a warm brown hand on her shoulder with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign on a man so controlled. "Everyone who sits in that chair is scared of something. That does not make it our problem. Go. I will check on you in 10 minutes. Ava looked at Elena once more, something unreadable passing across her young face, then disappeared down the hallway. Her footsteps were silent on the wooden floor. Malcolm waited until a door closed softly before returning to his seat, his expression unchanged, but something different in the set of his shoulders. "My daughter has an early school day tomorrow. I will need you to be specific and efficient." Elena nodded, understanding for the first time that she had entered a world operating on different rules. In her life, late-night emergencies commanded attention, resources, entire teams mobilized at a single text message. Here in this narrow townhouse, with its peeling door and its shelf of carefully labeled books, a 9-year-old's sleep schedule took precedence over a CEO's crisis. It was disorienting. It was humbling. She had never encountered anything like it. She did not know what to do with a black man who was not impressed by her urgency, her title, or her fear. Malcolm finally looked down at the documents in his hands. He turned pages methodically, his expression unchanged, reading for perhaps 3 minutes before setting the papers on the coffee table between them. His finger tapped once against a specific column of numbers. "How many people have access to your digital signature authentication officially?" 3. "Myself, my executive assistant, and our CFO, Thomas Granger. You know him?" "I know of him." Different thing. Malcolm leaned back in his chair and something flickered behind his eyes. Not suspicion exactly, but recognition. The look of a man who had seen this pattern before and remembered exactly what it had cost him. "These transaction patterns, I have seen them before. The routing structure, the timing of the transfers, the specific jurisdictions chosen. This is not improvised fraud. This is architecture." "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone designed the system years ago and has been refining it ever since. The shell companies, the timing delays, the jurisdictional arbitrage. At Morrison and Sterling, 7 years ago, I worked a case with identical signatures. A black woman, senior VP at a pharmaceutical company. The evidence was circumstantial until someone manufactured the final pieces. She went to prison for 3 years before an appeal uncovered the falsification." He paused, his jaw tightening. Wrong color, wrong ambitions. Someone decided she needed to be removed from the equation. Elena felt cold despite the warmth of the small room. "You think this is the same thing? The same person?" "I think systems do not fail people like me, Miss Rothman. They are built that way. They are designed to protect certain people and eliminate others. And the ones doing the building never have to get their hands dirty because the system does the work for them." Malcolm stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where streetlights cast pools of yellow against the darkness. His reflection, a tall black single dad in a worn cardigan, hovered faintly in the glass. "You came to me because I cannot be bought. But have you considered that I might simply refuse to help you? Why would you?" He turned back to face her, and for the first time she saw something other than careful neutrality in his expression. It might have been anger, it might have been grief. "Because you are not the victim here, Miss Rothman. You built your company on the same networks, the same old money, the same handshake agreements that have always excluded people who look like me. Now that system is eating its own and you expect me to feel sympathy. I expect you to follow the evidence. I always do. That is precisely what concerns me." He picked up the documents again, flipping to a specific page with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades navigating financial records. His finger traced a column of numbers, stopped, moved to another page, compared figures. His lips moved slightly as he calculated. Your CFO initiated a restructuring of the international division 18 months ago. Moved $300 million through subsidiaries in Dublin, Singapore, and the Caymans. The stated purpose was tax efficiency, standard corporate practice perhaps, but the routing patterns match a signature I've tracked across 6 different fraud cases in the past decade. Always the same architecture, always designed to frame someone at the executive level, always targeting people the board wanted removed. He set down the papers and looked at her directly, always succeeding, until now. Elena's throat tightened. Thomas has been with Rothman Ledger for 20 years. He was my father's closest advisor. He taught me half of what I know about running this company, and your father trusted him to manage the succession when he retired. Which means Granger expected to control the company through you. A figurehead CEO dependent on his guidance, grateful for his mentorship. Except you turned out to be more independent than he anticipated. You made decisions without consulting him. You brought in outside talent. You started asking questions about legacy accounts that hadn't been examined in years. How do you know all this? Malcolm set down the papers. I'm extrapolating from patterns. But if I'm right, then you're not dealing with fraud. You're dealing with a coup. And the people executing it have done this before. They know exactly how to make it look legitimate, and they know exactly how to make sure no one asks the right questions until it's too late. The clock on the mantle chimed softly. 1 a.m. Elena realized she had been in this house for nearly an hour, and Malcolm had offered her nothing except the truth, delivered without decoration or comfort. Will you help me? She asked. I'll examine the evidence. Whether I help you depends on what I find. She stood, gathering her portfolio with hands that trembled slightly. What do you need? Access to your company's original financial servers. Not the cloud backups, the physical machines in your building, the ones that haven't been altered yet. The servers are in a secured basement level. Only authorized personnel can enter. Then you'll need to get me authorized. That's not possible. The board has suspended my executive access pending the investigation. I can't even enter my own building without an escort. Malcolm nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly this answer. Then we do it without authorization. You mean break into my own company? I mean recover evidence before it's destroyed. There's a difference legally and morally, but it requires something from you first. Name it. When we enter that building, you won't look like Elena Rothman. No designer clothes, no watches that cost more than my car. No visible markers of who you are. You'll be invisible. Elena stared at him. You want me to disguise myself? I want you to become invisible. The way I've been invisible every time I've walked into a boardroom where no one expected to see a black man in my position. The way I'm invisible when I walk through certain neighborhoods in the city, or when I stand in an elevator with people who clutch their purses a little tighter. You'll wear what I tell you. You'll move how I tell you. And for one night, you'll understand what it means to exist without the armor of your name. Please. The word came out before she could stop it, raw and unguarded. Don't make me undress. Don't take that from me. It's all I have left. Malcolm's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Your suit is not your identity, Miss Rothman. But as long as you believe it is, you'll never understand how the people around you became so willing to destroy you. You'll never understand that they don't see a person when they look at you. They see a position, and positions can be eliminated. He walked to the door and opened it. Cold December air swept into the narrow hallway, carrying the smell of coming snow. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, wear dark clothes, nothing memorable, nothing that costs more than $50. And Miss Rothman? She paused at the threshold, clutching her portfolio like a shield. Leave your phone at home. They're already tracking it. The door closed behind her, and Elena stood on the steps of a Brooklyn townhouse, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. She had come here seeking an ally, someone who could be paid to solve her problem and disappear. What she found instead was a mirror held up by hands that refused to flinch, showing her a reflection she had never wanted to see. She didn't know yet whether Malcolm Hayes would save her, but she understood with sudden and uncomfortable clarity that he might be the first person in years who was willing to tell her the truth about who she had become. The clothes arrived by messenger the next afternoon, delivered in a plain brown bag with no return address. A gray hoodie, size medium, the fabric thin and slightly rough against her fingertips. Black jeans from a discount retailer, the kind sold in bulk at stores Elena had never entered. Sneakers that had never appeared in any fashion magazine, white with a single stripe, already scuffed as if they had been worn before. She held them the way one might hold evidence from a crime scene, with reluctance and something approaching dread. At 8:45 that evening, she stood before the full-length mirror in her penthouse bedroom, wearing the costume of an anonymity. Without makeup, without jewelry, without the structured lines of designer tailoring, she looked like someone she didn't recognize. The hoodie hung shapelessly on her frame. The jeans were slightly too long, pooling at her ankles. The sneakers made her feet look ordinary, forgettable, unremarkable in every way. She had never realized how much of her confidence lived in external markers. Stripped of them, what remained felt fragile, uncertain, almost helpless. She was 36 years old, and she had no idea who she was without the uniform of her success. Malcolm met her at a service entrance on 53rd Street, a metal door set into the side of a building she had walked past thousands of times without ever noticing. He wore similar clothes, dark and unremarkable, but on him they seemed natural, as if this were simply who he was when the world wasn't watching. His hoodie sat easily over his broad shoulders, his deep brown hands bare in the cold. "Security rotation happens every 40 minutes, he said without greeting. "We enter through the loading dock, take the freight elevator to basement level 2, and access the server room through a maintenance corridor. You have the master key card." Elena held up the card she'd taken from her home safe, the emergency backup her father had given her years ago and she'd never had reason to use. "It may have been deactivated," she admitted. "I haven't tested it." "Then we improvise. Stay close. Don't speak unless I ask you a question. Don't make eye contact with anyone we pass. And if something goes wrong, run. I'll find another way." They moved through the loading dock like shadows. Malcolm led with a confidence that suggested he'd done this before. His footsteps were silent despite his size. His awareness seemed to extend in all directions at once, noting exits, calculating distances, anticipating problems before they materialized. Elena followed in his wake, trying to match his invisibility and failing. The freight elevator groaned as it descended, a sound she had never heard before in her own building. The executive elevators were silent, climate-controlled, designed to make vertical travel feel like floating. This elevator shuddered and rattled like something alive and unhappy. "Breathe," Malcolm said without looking at her. "Fear makes you visible. Your shoulders are up near your ears, and you're taking shallow breaths. Anyone who sees you will know immediately that you don't belong." She forced herself to exhale, to drop her shoulders, to inhabit the borrowed clothes as if they were her own. It was harder than she expected. They reached basement level 2 and stepped into a corridor lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The air smelled of concrete and old wiring and the particular staleness of spaces rarely visited by human beings. Malcolm consulted something on his phone, a schematic of the building he must have obtained through channels Elena didn't want to examine, then led her left toward a heavy metal door marked authorized personnel only. The keycard worked. A small green light, a soft click, and they were inside. Whatever suspension the board had enacted, it hadn't reached this deep into the building's forgotten systems. The server room hummed with the sound of cooling fans, racks of equipment stretching in rows like a digital library. Status lights blinked in patterns Elena couldn't interpret. Malcolm moved to a terminal in the corner and began typing, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had spent decades navigating systems designed to exclude him. "Here," he pointed to a log file on the screen after several minutes of work. "The modifications to your signature authentication happened on October 3rd. Someone accessed the root directory using administrative credentials registered to your CFO's office." That could have been anyone in his department. True, but the access was logged at 2:17 in the morning, 3 days before the first suspicious transaction was executed. Malcolm scrolled to another file, his eyes scanning rapidly. And look at this. The same credentials were used to create a backdoor in your financial reporting system. Anyone with the right password could generate authorization documents bearing your digital signature without your knowledge or consent. Can you prove Thomas did this himself, that it wasn't someone else using his credentials? Not yet. But the trail leads to his office, and there's more. Malcolm pulled up another window. Email correspondence between Granger and 3 board members. Encrypted but routed through a server in Delaware that I've tracked before. The same server used in the Morrison and Sterling case. The same server that appeared in 4 other cases I've investigated over the past decade. What does that mean? It means this isn't improvised. It means someone has been planning your removal for months, possibly years. The question is why? The question is what you represent that makes you dangerous enough to destroy. A sound from the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, growing closer, then pausing somewhere nearby. Malcolm killed the monitor and motioned for Elena to press against the server rack, hidden in the narrow space between machines. His body blocked hers from view of the door. She could feel the heat of him, the controlled tension in his muscles, the absolute stillness of a man who had learned to survive as a black man in vulnerable spaces by becoming invisible. The footsteps resumed, passed the door without stopping, then faded into silence. "We need to go," Malcolm whispered. "I've copied what I can. The rest will require access to external servers. Records kept off-site, documents that Granger couldn't risk storing anywhere connected to the company." They moved back through the maintenance corridor, up the freight elevator, out the loading dock. The night air hit Elena's face like a slap, cold and clarifying and somehow merciful. Now what? Malcolm checked his phone, the screen briefly illuminating his deep brown features. Now I analyze what we have. Now I follow the trail backward until I find where it started. And you wait. I don't know how to wait. Then learn. It's the only skill that matters when the people with power decide you're expendable. It's the skill I've been practicing my entire life. He began walking toward the street, then paused and turned back, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Miss Rothman, when this is over, assuming it ends in your favor, you'll have choices to make about who you trust, about what kind of company you want to lead, about whether you keep building the same systems that tried to destroy you, or whether you build something different. You knew my father. I knew of him. Everyone in forensic accounting knew the Rothman name. Your family built an empire on the backs of systems that rewarded silence and punished questions. That's not an accusation. It's just history. The question is whether you want to be part of that history or whether you want to be something else." Elena watched him disappear into the darkness of a city that had always bent to her will. A city she had never really seen until now. For the first time, she understood that the bending had never been about her. It had been about what she represented, what her name signified, what doors her presence could open, and representatives could be replaced whenever they became inconvenient. The analysis took 4 days. 4 days of waiting in her penthouse, cut off from her own company, watching the financial news report on her impending downfall while her phone remained silent. 4 days of wondering whether she had placed her fate in the hands of a man who had every reason to let her fall. On the 5th day, Malcolm called. His voice was the same as always, flat and unrevealing. "Come to the house, bring nothing, tell no one." She arrived at dusk, the sky turning purple over Brooklyn. This time, Ava opened the door, still wearing those dark, watchful eyes, her brown skin a shade deeper than her father's, her curls pulled back with a glittering clip. "You're back," the girl said. "Your father asked me to come. I know. He's been working late every night since you were here. He thinks I don't notice when he doesn't sleep, but I notice everything." The girl didn't move from the doorway. "He talks about you sometimes. At night, when he thinks I'm asleep, he paces in the kitchen and talks to my mother's picture." "What does he say?" "He says you remind him of someone. I think he means my mother. She used to work like he does. She used to disappear into cases and forget to eat. She forgot a lot of things near the end." Ava paused, something shifting in her young face. "But she never forgot me. Not once. Not even when everything else was falling apart. Before Elena could respond, Malcolm appeared in the hallway. "Ava, homework." I finished it, then read the Baldwin book you gave me. The girl looked at Elena once more, something unspoken passing between them, then retreated toward her room. Malcolm led Elena into the small kitchen where documents covered every surface. Printed pages were annotated in his precise handwriting, lines and circles and arrows connecting pieces of a puzzle only he could see. "Tell me," Elena said, "Thomas Granger has been embezzling from Rothman Ledger for 9 years. The total amount is approximately $47 million, routed through the same shell company network he used to frame you. He started the year after your father retired, small amounts at first, testing the systems, finding the gaps, then larger and larger sums as he grew confident no one was watching. Why frame me now? Why not just continue stealing? Because you started asking questions. 2 years ago, you requested a full audit of the international division. Granger blocked it using procedural objections, but he knew it was only a matter of time before you tried again, so he decided to remove you before you could remove him. A preemptive strike disguised as your own criminality." Elena sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of betrayal settling on her shoulders. "My father trusted him completely. Your father benefited from not knowing. Willful blindness is easier when the numbers look good and the regulators stay away. Granger managed the relationship with the board, handled the difficult conversations, made problems disappear. Your father never asked how." Malcolm sat across from her, but that's not all I found. He slid a photograph across the table. A black woman in her 30s, professional portrait, wearing the blazer of a federal investigator. She had kind eyes and a determined jaw, the face of someone who believed in what she did. Her name was Denise Hayes, my wife. 8 years ago, she was lead investigator on a fraud case involving a company called Granger Holdings, a subsidiary that Thomas created before taking Rothman Ledger, a testing ground for the systems he would later perfect. She was 3 weeks away from presenting evidence that would have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. Elena looked from the photograph to Malcolm's face, seeing for the first time the geography of loss mapped on his expression. The careful neutrality she had mistaken for coldness was something else entirely. It was armor. It was the only way he could keep standing. What happened to her? Car accident, brake failure, single vehicle, no witnesses, a winding road in Connecticut where she was visiting a source. The investigation was reassigned to an agent who retired 6 months later with a significantly improved financial situation. A house in Florida, a boat, a silence that lasted until his death 2 years ago. Malcolm's voice remained flat, but his dark brown hands had tightened into fists on the table. A black woman from the Bronx accusing a wealthy white man with legal connections and an army employee. "Malcolm, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, be useful." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "In 3 days, your board meets to vote on your removal. I have enough evidence to stop the vote, but only if you're willing to present it yourself publicly in front of people who have already decided you're guilty." They won't listen to me. They won't listen to me either. A black man accusing their CFO of murder and fraud. They'll dismiss me before I finish my first sentence. But they might listen to the evidence if we force them to look at it. If we make ignoring it more dangerous than acknowledging it. He turned to face her. "This is not about saving your position, Miss Rothman. Your position is already gone. This is about exposing the truth. About making sure Thomas Granger cannot do to anyone else what he did to Denise and to me. I stopped mattering to the system a long time ago, but my daughter lives in this world. Every choice I make, every battle I fight, is about whether she'll inherit something better." Pause. "You have a daughter too. Boarding school in Connecticut, I believe. When was the last time you saw her?" The question landed like a blow to the chest. Elena couldn't remember. Months, certainly, perhaps longer. "I don't know. That's the difference between us, Miss Rothman. I know exactly when I last saw Ava this morning at 7:15, when I made her breakfast and walked her to the bus stop. I know what she ate, what she worried about, what made her laugh. Every single day I know because she's the only thing I can't afford to lose. Elena looked at the photograph of Denise Hayes, a black woman who had died trying to expose a truth the system preferred buried. What do you need me to do? Walk into that boardroom and stand beside me. Let them see that the evidence matters more than their opinions. He held out his hand. Granger has allies. They will come for both of us. Elena took his hand. His grip was firm, neither aggressive nor gentle, simply certain. The grip of a black single father who had already lost everything he cherished once and learned to keep fighting anyway. I've never been good at going back, she said. The boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Rothman Ledger building, a temple of glass and polished wood designed to intimidate anyone who entered. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Manhattan that seemed to assert dominion over the city itself. Elena had sat at the head of that table for 5 years, delivering quarterly reports, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She had never once imagined standing before it as an accused criminal, stripped of authority. Malcolm entered first. 12 faces turned toward him, and Elena watched the confusion spread across their features. They had expected lawyers, perhaps, or security consultants. They had not expected a black man in a simple navy suit carrying a leather briefcase and radiating the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Granger said from his seat near the head of the table, this is a private meeting of the board of directors. I don't know who you are, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. My name is Malcolm Hayes. I'm a forensic accountant. Miss Rothman retained my services to investigate the fraud allegations against her. Miss Rothman's authority to retain anyone was suspended by this board, Granger replied. I'm not here on her authority. I'm here on behalf of the evidence. Granger glanced around the table, seeking support. Security will escort you out, but one voice dissented. Harold Chen, the longest-serving board member, leaned forward with evident interest. Let him speak, Thomas. We're here to find the truth, aren't we? Malcolm opened his briefcase and began distributing folders to each board member. What you're looking at is a comprehensive analysis of financial irregularities within Rothman Ledger dating back 9 years. The irregularities total approximately $47 million, routed through a network of shell companies registered in Delaware, Dublin, and Singapore. The patterns match a signature I have tracked across 6 previous fraud cases. This is absurd, Granger interrupted. Elena's fingerprints are all over those transactions. Her digital signature authorized every one of them. Her digital signature was compromised on October 3rd of last year. I've included the server logs documenting the breach. Malcolm's voice remained steady. Those credentials trace directly to your office, Mr. Granger. They were used at 2:17 in the morning, 3 days before the first suspicious transaction was executed. The room fell silent. You're a hired gun, Granger said. Elena found someone willing to manufacture evidence in her defense. Then let's discuss the prosecution that never happened. Malcolm pulled a final document from his briefcase. 8 years ago, a federal investigator named Denise Hayes was building a case against a company called Granger Holdings. 3 weeks before she was scheduled to present her findings, she died in a car accident. Brake failure. What does that have to do with anything? Granger demanded. Granger Holdings was founded by you, Mr. Granger. The same shell company network now appears in this case. The same routing patterns. The same architecture of fraud. Malcolm's voice remained steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Denise Hayes was my wife, and I have spent 8 years waiting for the evidence that would prove what I've always known. Harold Chen spoke into the silence. Thomas, perhaps you should respond to these allegations. I don't have to respond to accusations from some grief-stricken accountant with a vendetta. Then let me make it one. Elena stepped forward, taking her place beside Malcolm. I'm requesting an immediate independent audit of all transactions flagged in Mr. Hayes' report. I'm also requesting that Thomas Granger's access to company systems be suspended pending the results. You can't request anything. Your authority has been suspended, Granger snapped. My authority as CEO has been suspended. My authority as a 32% shareholder has not. She looked around the table. My father left me that stake specifically so I could never be silenced by a board vote. Elena straightened her shoulders. If Thomas Granger can manufacture evidence to destroy a CEO, he can do it to any of you. He's been embezzling for almost a decade. He may have arranged the death of a federal investigator. These are not accusations I make lightly. The question is whether you're prepared to look at that evidence or whether you'd rather protect the comfortable lie. The room erupted into crosstalk, board members arguing with each other with Granger. Malcolm stood silent beside Elena, a black man letting the evidence do what evidence does when it finally reaches light. 23 minutes later, the vote was called, 9-3, in favor of an independent audit. Thomas Granger's access was suspended immediately. Elena's authority was partially restored. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was the first crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. The federal investigation that followed lasted 7 months. Malcolm testified 3 times, presenting evidence that linked Thomas Granger not only to the embezzlement at Rothman Ledger, but to a pattern of financial crimes spanning 2 decades. The brake failure that killed Denise Hayes was re-examined by independent experts who found evidence of tampering. The pressure came from every direction. Anonymous threats were delivered to Malcolm's home, requiring him to send Ava to stay with his sister in Philadelphia for 2 months. Media leaks were designed to discredit both him and Elena. Board members reversed their positions. Malcolm had expected all of it. As a black man challenging a powerful white executive, he'd planned for all of it. Evidence began appearing in unexpected places. Documents that should have been destroyed surfaced in the hands of prosecutors. Witnesses who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Elena chose to stand beside him through all of it. She could have retreated, could have accepted a settlement. Instead, she converted a guest room in her penthouse into a war room, working alongside Malcolm until 3 in the morning, learning to read financial documents with his precision. Granger was arrested in May, charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. For the first time since his wife's death, Malcolm allowed himself to believe that justice might actually prevail. Elena's reputation never fully recovered. Though she was cleared of all criminal allegations, the taint of scandal clung to her name. She stepped down as CEO in August. She retained her shareholder stake but sold most of it, using the proceeds to establish a foundation focused on supporting whistleblowers and fraud investigators, people like Denise, people like Malcolm, people the system tried to grind down. The real surprise came in September when she appeared at Malcolm's door, carrying a bottle of wine and an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Something like peace. "I visited my daughter," she said when he let her in. "Spent a whole week at her school. No phone calls to take, no emergencies to manage, just us. We walked around the campus and she showed me her favorite spots and told me about her friends. And she said something that reminded me of what you told me about presence versus provision." Elena set the wine on his kitchen table. She said she didn't care about the money or the name or the company. She just wanted to know that I saw her, that I was paying attention to who she actually was, not who I needed her to become. Malcolm nodded. "Children have a way of cutting through the noise. Where's Ava?" "Sleepover at a friend's house. First one she's had since she came back from Philadelphia. She's learning to trust again, learning that safety can exist outside these walls." They stood in his small kitchen, 2 people shaped by systems that had tried to break them, still standing despite everything. The photograph of Denise watched from its place on the mantle, the smiling black woman in her blazer, forever frozen in the moment before everything changed. "What now?" Elena asked. "Now I take on more cases. Now I keep building evidence against people like Granger. Now I raise my daughter and hope she inherits a world slightly less rigged than the one I found." He paused. "What about you?" "I am learning to live without the armor, without the title and the corner office." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "It is terrifying and somehow also freeing. Freedom usually is. The terrifying and the freeing, they live in the same place." They cooked dinner together that night, a simple meal of pasta with roasted vegetables. The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people to move without touching, but they found a rhythm. They talked about mundane things, neighborhood restaurants, books, the challenges of raising daughters talked about grief and healing and the slow process of becoming someone new. When Elena left near midnight, Malcolm walked her to the door. The street was quiet, the oak trees standing sentinel. "Thank you," she said. "Not for saving me, but for showing me what it looks like to survive without losing yourself. For showing me that strength does not have to mean hardness. You are stronger than you think, Elena." "I think we are past formalities, Malcolm," she said softly. He tasted the name like something new. "Be well." She walked into the night, a woman who had lost almost everything that once defined her, and discovered in that loss the person she might have been all along. Not the CEO, not the title, not the name, just Elena. Just a mother learning to be present. Malcolm watched her go, then closed the door and returned to the quiet of his house. On the mantel sat the framed photograph of Denise. He touched its edge gently. "We got him," he whispered. "Not the way I wanted. Not soon enough to save you. But we got him. And maybe because of that, someone else gets to keep the person they love." The photograph did not